Have you ever imagined a love that began with promises of eternity, but ended in a betrayal that devastated everything? Now, what if we told you that, after years of pain and silence, the unexpected reunion of two hearts could bring a truth even more shocking than the betrayal itself? Prepare yourself for a journey of redemption, where forgiveness is not the end, but the beginning of something completely unexpected. What will Lúcia discover about her past and the man who broke her heart? You won't want to miss the outcome of this story. Lúcia's story isn't just the story of a woman who suffered. It's the story of a soul torn apart by pain and betrayal, a woman who trusted those she loved and, in the end, was left in the shadows of a past that seemed endless. Sometimes, pain is like an invisible scar, unseen but felt every day, and Lúcia felt it firsthand, in a way that only those who have been through something similar can understand. Imagine being in Lúcia's shoes, in the early days of a love that seemed eternal. The promises made, the sparkle in the eyes of someone who believes they've finally found the right person. They dreamed together, talked about the future, laughed about travel plans, about a life together. However, this fairy tale soon shattered into a cruel reality. Lúcia's trust was irreversibly broken, like a cracked glass, never to be the same. It was at the moment she trusted most, when her heart was surrendered body and soul, that Gabriel, the man she fell in love with, committed the worst betrayal she could imagine. Lúcia had no way of foreseeing what was to come. Deep down, she wanted to believe the love they shared was genuine. But when love turns into a lie, it's as if the earth is pulled out from under your feet, leaving everything to crumble in an instant. And that's exactly what happened. Gabriel, with his sweet words and empty promises, paved the way for Lúcia's pain, a pain she felt deep within, a pain that came not only from disappointment, but from the loss of faith itself. Time passed, but the memories of that night still lingered like shadows. She found herself at a crossroads between the love she felt and the pain he had caused. How could she continue to live, knowing she had been so profoundly deceived? The emotional impact of betrayal is not simple. It's not just about what happens in the moment. It's about the echoes of that betrayal that reverberate over time. Lúcia found herself in a spiral of conflicting feelings, anger, sadness, a sense of helplessness. But the deepest, most difficult to deal with, was the emptiness she felt inside, as if a part of her had been ripped away and thrown away, as if she would never be able to trust anyone again. The following months were a whirlwind of emotional turmoil. She tried to move on, but the memory of that betrayal still clung to her soul. No matter where she was, who she was with, that pain followed her. The worst part was that no one could see what she was feeling. Sometimes she wondered if she would ever be able to trust again, to love another person without feeling the weight of fear and doubt. Lúcia had to rebuild her life. But how do you rebuild something that was so cruelly torn apart? She tried. She tried to move away from the pain. She tried to move forward. But there was one thing that never left her: the memories. Every time she tried to look to the future, the past would come flooding back, reminding her of what she had lost. But, as often happens in the most difficult stories, life has a strange way of working things out. Lúcia began to realize that, even after the pain, there was still something valuable there. She found strength she never knew existed within herself. Little by little, the woman who had been shattered by betrayal began to rebuild herself, piece by piece, though the scar would never completely disappear. And then, after the long process of healing and self-discovery, something inexplicable happened. Gabriel, the man who had hurt her so deeply, reappeared in her life. It wasn't something she expected. In fact, she had blocked out any possibility of retelling her story with him. But, as if by a twist of fate, he appeared, bringing with him more than just painful memories. He brought something Lúcia couldn't have anticipated: a chance to rewrite her story, to redefine forgiveness, and perhaps discover something new about love and herself. The pain, anger, and confusion began to transform into questions Lucia never imagined she would have to answer. What would she do? How would she react to the man who, at one point, was the reason for her pain? Would it be possible to overcome that past? Or would the weight of betrayal still be too heavy? Before we continue this emotional journey of reunion and forgiveness, I want to know, have you ever experienced something that profoundly impacted your life? How did you cope? Leave a comment, because your story might touch someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like this video if you connected with Lucia's story. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the development of this story. We have much more to come, and Lucia's journey is just beginning. Lucia's life changed irreversibly that night, but no one would ever know it by looking at her. She smiled as always, worked with the same dedication as before, and continued to interact with others as if nothing had happened. But deep down, something had broken in. Her soul, something she desperately tried to keep hidden. The years of silence began to weigh on her in ways not even she could comprehend. Each day was an internal battle between the desire to move forward and the constant reminder of a painful past. Sometimes Lucia would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, her heart pounding. Her mind would take her back to that moment, to the ringing phone, to the scheduled meeting, to the conversation that should never have happened. The memory of Gabriel still haunted her, but it wasn't the love that hurt anymore. It was the betrayal itself, the feeling that she had been deceived by someone she trusted completely. It was a constant pain, a weight she carried without ever sharing it with anyone. She threw herself into work as a refuge. When the day began, Lucia immersed herself in her tasks, trying not to think about what was behind the curtains of her heart. She seemed so focused, so organized, as if her life were in control. But at night, when the loneliness grew more intense, she found herself alone with her thoughts again. Even surrounded by friends, at parties and gatherings, Lucia felt empty. Everything seemed superficial. The conversations, the laughter, the distractions. Nothing filled that hole inside her. She went to places she'd never been before, met new people, tried to free herself from memories. The travels, the new experiences, the solitary adventures in distant cities were a way of reinventing herself. Each new city, each new face, was like an attempt to bury the past, to find something new that could heal what had been lost. But whenever she looked to the horizon, the past imposed itself, insistent, like a shadow that never left her. She talked to other men, but something was always on her mind. Fear. The fear of being deceived again, of losing herself in a story that wasn't true. Time passed, but the pain didn't lessen. Lucia wondered, would it be possible to trust again? Could someone show her a love that was trustworthy, that didn't hide lies behind sweet words? Friendships began to deepen, but she knew there was something holding her back from giving herself completely. Her life was, in many ways, on hold. Lucia found herself moving forward, but at a slow pace, as if carrying an invisible weight. Then, one day, as she was walking alone through the streets, she passed a store window. Something caught her eye. A photo of a couple. She stopped. The image of the couple smiling at sunset. Arms intertwined. A scene of utter happiness. For a moment, Lucia saw herself there, arm in arm with someone, without a shadow of suspicion. But soon the smile faded. The image dissolved. She knew she couldn't have that, not now. What she had was a still open wound, an insecurity that slowly consumed her. And it was in this state of uncertainty that Lucia began to find a strange form of healing. She dedicated herself to work and began investing more time in herself. She enrolled in meditation courses, saw a psychologist, and started exercising. But deep down, what she wanted most was a way to reconnect with herself, to recover something that had been lost in the midst of that betrayal. Silence was not only a reflection of what she felt inside, but a way to protect herself from the outside world. Lucia distanced herself from many, even her closest friends. They noticed, of course, but she always said she was fine. It was easier that way. Fewer explanations. Fewer risks. The time that passed felt like an attempt at reinvention. But deep down, Lúcia saw herself as broken. Someone who could never be whole again. Nights when pain woke her were frequent, but she learned to cope. Each tear, each sigh in the silence, was like a small escape valve. She told herself she was strong. I can move on, she thought. And indeed she could, but the question lingered. For how long? However, what Lúcia didn't know was that life has its unexpected ways of doing things. Even though she tried to shield herself from all the harm her past had caused her, something was about to happen. Something that would turn her life upside down again. And, as always, things happen when we least expect them. But before we continue with the story, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a time when you tried to move on but felt like you couldn't completely forget what happened? How did you deal with it? Share your experience in the comments. And if you're enjoying this story, like the video, and subscribe to the channel to follow Lúcia's journey to the end. Don't miss what's next. Lúcia sat in a quiet cafe that autumn afternoon, watching the dry leaves dance in the wind outside. Her coffee was almost gone, the steam rising slowly, as if reflecting what was on her mind. A temporary calm, a false sense of control. She hadn't expected something as simple as a cold afternoon to change her life forever. And yet, that's exactly what happened. The sound of the door opening interrupted her thoughts. She looked up, expecting to see a customer entering, like so many others that day. But what happened was different. The world seemed to stop for a second that dragged on. Gabriel entered the cafe. It was him. There was no denying it. Even after all this time, his gaze fixed on her, the way he moved. Everything seemed the same, as if time had done nothing but soften her memories. But to Lúcia, that face was no longer familiar. It was as if she were seeing a shadow of the past, a distant memory. And suddenly, everything she had built, the entire wall of security she had erected around herself, began to crumble. He seemed nervous, more so than she could have ever imagined. His steps faltered before reaching Lúcia's table. The air between them felt thick, as if the atmosphere was charged with something they were both trying to avoid. Gabriel stopped in front of her, and their eyes met. A look she couldn't quite place. There was something there. But what? Remorse? Regret? Or was it something more selfish, like a need for redemption? "Lúcia, can I sit?" he said, and his voice, which she had already known so well, now sounded strange. A mixture of insecurity and urgency. She stared at him, the silence stretching, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. The anger, the pain, everything seemed to come flooding back. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't simply ignore him. He was there. After so many years, he was back. She made a slight movement with her hand, inviting him to sit, still speechless. He complied, but he no longer seemed the man she had loved. Time, pain, and betrayal had changed him. But somehow, she still recognized his lost gaze. It was as if, in that moment, they were two strangers, but at the same time, two ghosts from a past that had never truly gone. Gabriel seemed unsure how to begin. He opened his mouth several times, but the words seemed to escape him. He stared at the coffee cup in front of Lúcia, his fingers touching the edge of the plate as if trying to hold on to something. He was nervous, and Lúcia could see it clearly, as if the weight of it all was crushing him. The man who had once been so certain of his choices now stood there, visibly shaken. "I know you don't want to hear this," he finally said, his voice shaking. "But I need to talk. I didn't expect you. That you'd still be here. That you'd still look at me like that." Lúcia didn't know if she felt anger or something deeper, like sadness, at seeing someone who somehow still held a piece of her heart, even after everything he'd done. But there was something in that moment, something she couldn't explain. that made the air between them feel heavy, tense. It was the silence that was no longer comfortable. It was their story, still unresolved, still alive inside her. "You have no right to speak to me like that," she replied, her voice firm but shaky. It was a reaction she knew she needed to make, something she had to do to protect herself, to not lose herself again. "After everything you've done, after leaving me in the dark, now you show up, after years, and ask me to hear your apology." Gabriel's face tightened. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze seemed to search for something in Lúcia, something he couldn't quite place. The pain she felt wasn't just hers. He too carried a pain, a weight, and it was evident. But how could she trust him? How could she forget what he did, the pain he caused? I don't have enough excuses," Gabriel murmured, almost as if speaking to himself. "But I also can't live with this, Lúcia. I can't move on knowing I made you the most miserable person in the world. I know I'm too late. I know that. But I wanted you to know I'm here. Not to justify myself, but perhaps to try to make amends." And in that instant, something in Lúcia began to shift. It wasn't a complete change, nor a concession, but there was something in the air, an unexpected weakness. She didn't know what to make of it all. Meeting Gabriel again wasn't just a reliving of the past. It was a reopening of something she thought had closed. Gabriel's words, despite the pain, began to shake the walls she had so painstakingly erected. He was there, but what did he want? And what did she want from him? It was an unexpected reunion, yes. But more than that, it was a reunion with what she had left behind. And now, Lúcia had to decide if she was ready to look at the past again, to face it, to hear what Gabriel had to say, or if she would turn her back once again on everything their love had represented. As Gabriel waited, a thick silence fell over them, and Lúcia knew that somehow their future was about to be written. But this time, the pen was in her hands. "Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a reunion with someone from your past that brought up emotions you no longer knew how to deal with? Leave your comment below and share your experience. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because Lúcia's story is far from over." Silence hung between them, heavy as a dark cloud about to break. Gabriel had spoken, and Lúcia knew his words were there, in front of her, waiting for a reaction. But what he didn't know was that the real struggle wasn't between them, but within herself. The pain of everything that had happened, the years of suffering, the betrayal, all of it had been kept in a sealed box inside Lúcia, and now somehow that box was opening again. And what she felt more than anything else was a whirlwind of emotions. She looked at him, and something inside her broke. The anger, once so vivid, now seemed more distant, like a faded memory. But forgiveness. Forgiveness was something she didn't know how to give. Lúcia had been hurt so deeply, a wound that would never fully heal. She had rebuilt her life around that pain, to the point where it had become a part of her. How could she simply forget? How could she simply erase what he'd done? She felt the weight of everything that had happened deep in her chest, squeezing her, suffocating her. She took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts, trying to remain calm. But the anger was still there, a flame burning inside her. How could he do that? How could he promise something and destroy it so easily? The sense of betrayal, the shock of discovery, it all came back in a flash, more vivid than ever. The bitter taste of the lie was still in her mouth. She wanted to scream, wanted to say everything she felt, but something held her back. Gabriel watched her expectantly. He knew something important was happening, but perhaps he didn't realize the magnitude of what she was facing internally. Lúcia, for her part, struggled with herself, with the temptation to give in to her anger, to send Gabriel away, to banish him from her life forever. But there was also a part of her, a part he still touched, a part that wondered, What if she forgave? What if forgiveness was what she needed to move on, to finally free herself from the pain? Lúcia felt the weight of these questions, as if she were split in half. On one side, anger, frustration, and pain. On the other, the desire for peace, to leave it all behind, to close the cycle once and for all. She felt trapped, as if it were impossible to move forward without first resolving this issue, without deciding which side of the scale she would fall on. She knew that forgiveness didn't mean erasing the past, but she also knew that anger wouldn't get her anywhere. She looked at Gabriel, her gaze softening, but her heart still racing. "I don't know," she began, her voice trembling, emotion surging. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I have the strength to." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if searching within herself for an answer. The pain she felt was still there, raw and pulsing, but the feeling that forgiveness would be her only escape began to grow within her. But forgiveness, for Lúcia, wouldn't be easy. Forgiveness would mean letting go of a part of herself, a part she had held tight, a part that had protected her for all these years. Forgiveness meant letting go of everything she had held on to, everything she believed was right. She didn't know if she was ready for it. She didn't know if she could let go of the anger. Gabriel saw the conflict in her face, saw her eyes drift off into some distant place, as if she were trying to find an answer she didn't yet have. He reached out, hesitantly, as if afraid to touch something that might break her further. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now," he said, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. I just wanted you to know that I regret it, and that if you give me the chance, I'll do everything I can to try to make amends." Lúcia looked at her outstretched hand, and something stirred inside her. It wasn't relief. It wasn't the peace she'd expected, but it was the beginning of something she couldn't yet define. But deep inside, she felt the weight of her own vulnerability. What would she do now? Did she believe in second chances? Did she believe people could change? She swallowed, trying to control her voice, which was about to break. "I can't tell you I'll forgive you now, Gabriel. But I also can't tell you I'll hate you forever." Lúcia's response reflected her inner struggle. She was torn, but she was also beginning to realize something important. Forgiving didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean allowing herself to be vulnerable again. But it could be the key to what she so desperately sought. Freedom. The freedom to stop carrying the burden of anger. The freedom to move forward. But like anyone faced with a profound dilemma, she knew that forgiveness wouldn't be a simple decision. What she truly knew was that only time would tell if she was truly ready to release the pain she'd carried for so long. And in the meantime, she found herself back at a decision point. Forgive, or continue carrying the pain. What would Lúcia do next? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever experienced something that made you question the importance of forgiveness, share your story. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the continuation of Lúcia's emotional journey. The cafe around them seemed to have stopped. The din, the lively conversations, the clinking of cups and cutlery, everything seemed distant, as if the only thing that existed in that moment was the silence between Lúcia and Gabriel. The conflict within Lúcia was still there, heavy, but now there was something new, a tension in the air she couldn't ignore. Gabriel stood before her, his breathing slightly rapid, his eyes fixed on her, as if trying to communicate something very important, something he'd been carrying for so long. But what could be so important? What could he say to change something that seemed already decided? Something as definitive as the pain he'd caused? "Lúcia, I need to tell you something," Gabriel began, his voice carrying a seriousness she hadn't expected. He was nervous, but at the same time, there was an urgency in his words, as if he'd been preparing for this for a long time, but it was still difficult to say. Lúcia, her heart still heavy, stared at him, unwilling, yet needing to hear what he had to say. Curiosity and fear mingled in her chest. "What do you want to tell me, Gabriel?" Her voice was firm. But inside, she wondered if she was ready to hear another lie or, worse yet, new pain. He hesitated, looking down for a moment, as if searching for the right words. When he looked back at her, his eyes were filled with something Lúcia couldn't quite place. "I wasn't the only one involved in what happened between us," he said, and those words fell on her like a bomb about to explode. Lúcia watched him, trying to process what he'd just said, but her mind was in turmoil. "What do you mean by that?" she asked hoarsely, trying to control the fear that was beginning to spread through her body. Each word seemed to make the ground beneath her feet tremble, as if the very concept of reality were disintegrating. Gabriel took a deep breath, looking as if he were preparing to face the biggest confession of his life. "I know you think I was responsible for everything. I know I betrayed you. But Lúcia, I wasn't the only one who betrayed you." He looked at her, hoping his words made some sense, but he knew her reaction might be one of complete rejection. "There was more. There was someone involved in this. Someone much closer to you than you could ever imagine." Lucia's world seemed to stop. She couldn't understand. She stared at him, her hands shaking, but she couldn't tell if she was shaking with anger or confusion. Who? Who else could be involved? The question came out almost a whisper, but the impact of the answer would be even more profound than she imagined. Gabriel took a step forward, leaning slightly toward her, as if searching for a way to soften his words. "It was my sister, Lúcia. My sister, Camila. She knew everything that was going on between us. And she was the one who encouraged me to do it. She was playing the cards the whole time." He sounded deeply remorseful, but at the same time, Lúcia felt as if the ground were collapsing beneath her feet. Lucia's mind was spinning. Not just Gabriel's betrayal, but Camilla's betrayal. The woman Lúcia, considered almost a friend, a confidant. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Everything she thought she knew about their relationship, about the world around them, was being turned upside down. But why? Why would she do this? How could you? Lúcia began to speak, pain taking over her, her words seeming to make no sense. She tried to understand how all of this was possible. Was Camilla, her friend, her trusted sister, part of this? How could Gabriel have gotten so involved? How had he allowed her to manipulate him? Gabriel looked at her, sincerity written all over his face. "I never imagined she was capable of this. I was lost, Lúcia. She used me, made me believe she was doing the right thing, that you would never love us the way she loved me. And when she realized we were truly in love, she did everything she could to destroy it." Lúcia felt her stomach churn. Everything was beyond her comprehension. Gabriel had not only betrayed her trust, but he was now revealing a much larger conspiracy, something that dismantled everything she thought she knew. How could she react to this? How should she feel? Not only the pain of deception, but now the betrayal coming from someone she considered close, Gabriel's sister. The weight of it all nearly suffocated her. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process his words, trying to find some sense, some meaning, but nothing made sense. Her world was crumbling again, and her anger was about to explode. Gabriel seemed to sense the pain she was feeling, and with a trembling voice continued, "Lúcia, I know you're angry. I know none of this makes sense, but I needed you to know the truth. I love you, and I don't know how, but I want to fix all of this. If you give me the chance, I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild what I destroyed." Lúcia didn't know what to say. She looked at him, her eyes filled with suppressed anger, but also with a sadness she no longer knew how to hide. How could it be so difficult? How could it be so complex? She didn't know how to deal with everything that was happening, how to react to Gabriel's revelation. But one thing was clear. She was facing a truth that would change everything. "Now I want to hear from you." Have you ever experienced a situation where someone revealed something to you that made you see reality in a completely different way? How did you handle it? Leave your opinion in the comments. Share your story. And of course, if you're enjoying this journey, like this video and subscribe to the channel to continue following Lucia's story. She's just beginning to discover what really happened. The air in the cafe felt increasingly dense, as if time were dragging on endlessly. Gabriel's revelation still echoed in Lucia's mind, reverberating like a shockwave, stirring every fiber of her being. Her heart pounded in her chest, yet at the same time, her mind was so clouded with confusing thoughts that everything seemed a blur. She tried to grasp the magnitude of what he had said, but more than that, she felt a growing anger, a sharp pain, as if everything she had believed was a cruel game. She stood abruptly from the table, her hands trembling, a sense of helplessness engulfing her. The cafe, which had once been a simple respite from the day, now felt like a stage for an emotional drama she didn't know how to handle. Gabriel remained where he was, watching her with an expression of pain and expectation, as if waiting for something. But Lucia no longer knew what to do. Her pain was no longer just a memory of the past. It was now an open wound, exposed before them both. How could you, Gabriel? Her tone wasn't just anger, but deep heartbreak, as if the words simply couldn't come out with the intensity she felt inside. How could you deceive me like that? How could you destroy everything? Not only what we were, but also my trust. She was screaming, and she didn't even realize it. The words seemed to come from a deep place. Place where anger and pain met, where the silence she'd carried for so long now turned into a whirlwind of emotions she could no longer control. Gabriel, who had been waiting for a reaction, now seemed completely lost. He tried to stand up to speak, but she cut him off, the words rushing out, leaving no room for him to respond. You promised me everything, Gabriel. You said it would be forever, and now you tell me that everything that happened was nothing more than your own sister's. Manipulation? Her words were sharp, cutting, like knives he could barely dodge. I gave you everything, and you threw it away like it was nothing, like I was just a pawn in her game. Gabriel didn't know what to say. He knew nothing he could say now could justify what he'd done. His words stuck in his throat, as if the regret he felt so intensely wasn't enough to erase the pain he'd caused. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to do everything differently. But the truth was, Lucia's pain was etched on his face, in his posture, in his voice. I know I can't ask you to forgive me, Lucia, he said, his voice almost breaking. I don't deserve this. I was an idiot. I don't know what else to say. I can't go back in time and fix everything I did. But please understand that I never meant to hurt you. She interrupted him again, this time with a voice so firm it seemed to cut through the room. You didn't mean to hurt me? You betrayed me, Gabriel. Not just with lies, but with manipulation. With betrayal. I don't know if I can live with this. I don't know if I can just let it go. As if nothing happened. Lucia stood there before him, completely devoid of any shred of compassion, completely surrendered to the pain he had caused. What had once been merely an emotional wound now became a battle, where Gabriel's words were lost before the wall she had built. She wanted to be strong. She wanted to finally have control over everything, but she was fighting a pain she didn't know how to face. She looked at him with eyes filled with tears, but also with a strength he hadn't expected to see. I'm not the same person anymore, Gabriel, she said, her voice now soft but firm. What you did, what you and your sister did, destroyed who I was. I lost myself. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I feel anymore. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. What happened to us? What was our love? It's over. Gabriel took a step forward, as if to reach out and touch her, but stopped mid-movement. He felt the weight of those words, their impact on him. She was right. He'd lost her. He'd lost her trust. He'd lost the woman he loved, and he knew there was nothing he could do to bring it all back. "I understand if you don't want to talk to me anymore," he said, his eyes heavy with sadness and regret. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I just wanted you to know that while I was capable of doing what I did, I never thought it would hurt you like this. I was blind." Gabriel's words were filled with remorse, but Lúcia didn't know if his remorse was enough. The pain was still seared into her heart, and she didn't know if she could let it go so easily. All she felt now was emptiness and a sense of loss so profound that any explanation seemed futile. The silence that followed was deafening. Neither of them knew what to say or do. Lúcia felt the weight of his words, but what she wanted most at that moment was relief from the pain, a way out of this emotional hell she was living. But there was no easy way out, no simple cure. The path ahead seemed dark and tortuous. Lúcia didn't know if she could continue listening to what Gabriel had to say. She didn't know if she could bear to listen to any more empty words of regret. She felt the urge to leave, to turn her back and leave everything behind. But at the same time, something kept her there, waiting for an answer that might never come. What would Lúcia do now? Would she face the pain, confront the ghosts of her past, or close that door for good and move forward alone? She knew the decision was in her hands, but she had no idea how much that choice would change the course of her life. And you? What would you do if you were in Lúcia's shoes? Have you ever felt like you were at such a difficult decision point, where emotions seem to explode and the past can't be left behind? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to continue following Lúcia's journey. She still has a lot to face. Lúcia was in a different place now. The cafe where she had been before, the busy street where her reunion with Gabriel had nearly paralyzed her, all seemed like a distant scene, like a movie that had passed but could not be erased. She had moved away from the chaos, from the encounters and reunions, and into a quieter, deeper place within herself. Silence had become her companion, and somehow she was beginning to realize that this solitude was no longer something to fear. She was alone, but no longer empty. Instead, she felt a sense of fulfillment, something that came from within, something she had never sought before. In recent days, Lúcia found herself facing the ghosts of her past. She spent hours thinking about everything that happened, reflecting on the moments of happiness that turned to pain, on the lies that blinded her for so long. She wondered why she hadn't seen it before, why she'd allowed love to become a battlefield, a silent war where trust was shattered. But at the same time, she began to understand that to see the lessons, it was necessary to distance herself, to look deeper. During these days of introspection, Lúcia allowed herself to feel the pain without rushing to push it away. She cried, raged, and even tried to deny everything that had happened, as a natural defense. But over time, she realized that denying the pain was denying herself. It was then that she understood that healing would not come with a simple act of forgiveness or forgetting. Healing would come from accepting that all of this was part of her journey, a journey that now prepared her for something greater. As she reflected on her past, Lúcia began to understand the impact that pain had on her life. She realized that for too long, she had lived for an idealized love, something that didn't exist outside her mind. Gabriel's love, their relationship, was real at its core, but the expectations she had created around it were a trap. She believed that if she loved enough, things would work out. But what she didn't see was that love wasn't enough to sustain trust, loyalty, and truth. When these pillars fail, love becomes a burden, a shadow. And as she reflected, Lúcia realized something else. The pain she felt wasn't just about Gabriel's betrayal, but about herself. The pain of not having listened to herself, of having placed her expectations in someone else's hands, of having allowed love to be an outlet for her own insecurities. She realized she could no longer expect someone else to be responsible for her happiness or her pain. The healing she sought would come not from without, but from within. Lúcia began to allow herself to look at herself with more compassion. She had given too much of herself to someone else, and she had forgotten to take care of herself. For so long, what she craved most was Gabriel's approval, and she never realized how much she had neglected her own voice, her own desires. During her healing journey, she found herself beginning to listen to her own needs, to realize what truly mattered to her. She was rediscovering her strength, something she had not found when she was immersed in the pain of betrayal. She also understood that the healing process was not linear. There were good days and bad days, moments when she felt stronger, and others when the pain returned with overwhelming force. But Lúcia learned to accept these moments as part of her transformation. Every tear, every feeling of anger and confusion was part of the rebuilding process. She was no longer trying to rush her recovery. She was learning to respect her own time. Lúcia was no longer a victim of the past. She was a woman in process, a woman who, little by little, was beginning to see the beauty in the pain that had shaped her. As the pain faded, a new realization emerged. Lúcia realized that at some point she would need to forgive, not for Gabriel, not for anyone, but for herself. Forgive for believing in something that wasn't real, for getting lost in the illusions of love. Forgive for allowing her life to be defined by a story that wasn't hers. Forgiveness now became a gift she would give herself to move forward, not for him, but for herself. In her reflections, Lúcia began to realize the strength that had always been within her. She had been more resilient than she imagined, stronger than any circumstance had allowed her to see. And although love still had the power to hurt her, she knew she would be able to deal with it differently. She didn't need another person to be complete. She was already whole. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a question still lingered. Would forgiveness be enough? Would she ever be able to look back and truly accept it, without the pain still being a part of her story? Could reuniting with Gabriel be a chance to rebuild what was lost, or simply a final farewell, where she would leave all the memories behind and start over? This journey of healing was just beginning, and, like any journey, she knew it would take time, patience, and courage. But now, more than ever, Lúcia was ready to continue, to move forward with the strength she had rediscovered within herself. And as the pain subsided, a new Lúcia was beginning to be born. Have you ever gone through a healing process after great suffering? How did you cope with the pain and rebuild yourself? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to continue following Lúcia's journey. Her story isn't over yet. Lúcia was on the verge of a decision that could change everything. Her journey, the pain, the forgiveness, the reunion with Gabriel, everything had led her to that moment. The anger she felt, the sadness that consumed her, the questions that haunted her. She was torn, full of doubts and fears. What would become of her life if she decided to move on? If she finally forgave? And what would happen if she decided to continue without him, putting an end to this story once and for all? She was at a critical point, looking back at the past, at the rubble of what once was, and wondering if there was still anything worthwhile left. But it was in that moment, in that fragility, that Lúcia felt a shift within herself, something she never imagined. She realized that the transformation wasn't in Gabriel's words, nor in her regrets. The true change was within herself, in her ability to free herself from what had held her captive for so long. As Gabriel watched her, waiting for an answer he knew would change everything, Lúcia suddenly felt a strength she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked at him, no longer with anger, nor sadness, but with a silent understanding that to move forward, she needed to first reconnect with herself. He couldn't be the key to her happiness. She already was the key. She always had been. Lúcia took a deep breath. The words she spoke now weren't about what he deserved or didn't deserve, but about what she needed to keep living. "Gabriel," she began, her voice soft but filled with a certainty he hadn't expected. "I loved you. I loved you so deeply that it broke me. But now, I understand that in order to move forward, I don't need an apology. I need a fresh start. A start where I put myself first. She felt the tension within her begin to dissipate, as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. What she sought was not a restoration of what had been, but a creation of what could be. Something new, something entirely her own. Lúcia was no longer trying to be the woman she had been before the pain, nor the woman he had disappointed. She was becoming a woman who accepted herself in all her complexity, with all her scars, and who gave herself permission to be happy, with or without Gabriel. Gabriel watched her, his eyes filled with something undefined. Regret, acceptance, or perhaps something even deeper. The understanding that he had lost not only the woman he loved, but the chance to be the man she deserved. He knew deep down that true transformation no longer depended on him. Lúcia had already transformed. She was already at peace with what had happened, and forgiveness, if granted, would come from a place of strength, not weakness. "I understand," he said, his voice soft, finally accepting that their time had passed. "I know I can't ask for anything more. I just hope you find the happiness you deserve." Lúcia looked at him with understanding. It wasn't a bitter goodbye. It was, somehow, a healing goodbye. "I've already found it, Gabriel. I've already found it within myself." And with those words, Lúcia rose from the table, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The weight of anger, pain, and doubt seemed to have been lifted from her, and for the first time, she knew she was ready to move forward, on her own. Her journey was no longer tied to anyone, not to the past, not to betrayal. She was master of her own destiny, and the future was now something she could choose. Gabriel stood there, watching her transformation, and for the first time, he saw that what he had lost could not be recovered. But the real loss was his. Lúcia had found something he had never known, the true freedom to be who she was, without needing anyone's validation. Lucia's life would then take an unexpected turn, not because she would have to go back or change who she was, but because, by freeing herself from the weight of the past, she would become someone stronger, wiser, and more full of self-love than she ever imagined possible. And the lesson Lúcia learned was clear. Forgiveness wasn't something she owed Gabriel. Forgiveness was something she gave herself, so she could move on with her life, so she could live with a lighter, more open heart. She no longer needed to carry the pain of the past. What mattered now was what was to come, and she was ready for it. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to forgive in order to move forward? What was that transformation like for you? Leave your comments below. If you've been following Lúcia's journey so far, like the video and subscribe to the channel because we have more inspiring stories like this to share.